The air in the 50th floor boardroom was worth more per cubic foot than most people make in a year. It was a sterile, cold cathedral of glass and steel overlooking Manhattan, a place where empires were traded over lukewarm coffee. Alexander Pierce, a man who treated business like warfare, felt the familiar thrill of conquest. The acquisition was almost complete. He was about to absorb a brilliant little company, a rising star in the sustainable toy market. Then the door opened. His legal team stood, and he turned a predator, ready to greet his prey. But the woman who walked in wasn't prey. She was poised, her gaze steady, her presence commanding the room in a way his billions never could. A ghost from a past he had brutally buried. His breath hitched. The carefully constructed world he had built over 6 unforgiving years shattered into 1,000,000 silent pieces. It was her, Sophia, and behind her on the presentation screen, in a photo holding one of the company's toys, was a boy with his eyes, his son. New York City in 2019 was a symphony of ambition and desperation, and Alexander Pierce was its conductor. At 32, he was the ruthless CEO of Pierce Global, a private equity firm his father had forged with iron and ice. Alexander had inherited the iron, but perfected the ice. He moved through the world with a chilling efficiency, his life a series of calculated acquisitions of companies, of assets, of women. His heart was a locked vault, the combination long forgotten. His nights were often spent at places like Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive its name was whispered rather than spoken. It was here, amidst the hushed clinking of silverware on porcelain and the low murmur of the city's elite, that he first saw Sophia Petrova. She wasn't like the other women in the room, brittle, lacquered their eyes, scanning for opportunities. Sophia moved with a quiet grace, her waitress uniform a stark contrast to the designer gowns surrounding her. There was a weariness in her shoulders, but an unextinguished light in her deep brown eyes. She was an art student at Cooper Union, working grueling hours to pay for tuition, and her tiny Brooklyn apartment, her dreams of painting vibrant canvases tucked away between taking orders for truffle risotto and decanting vintage Bordeaux. Their first interaction was a cliché born of chaos. A clumsy busboy jostled her arm, sending a tray of champagne flutes cascading down the front of Alexander's custom Tom Ford suit. Panic flared in her eyes, expecting an eruption of fury. His dinner guest, a sycophantic banker, began to sputter apologies on Alexander's behalf. But Alexander didn't erupt. He simply looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the genuine horror on her face, the flush of embarrassment, and something else, a defiant spark. She wasn't afraid of his power, but of the consequences. "It's fine," he said, his voice calmer than anyone expected. "A little champagne never hurt anyone." He waved off the fawning manager and met her gaze. "Are you all right?" The question stunned her. No one ever asked if she was all right. "Yes. I'm so sorry, Mr. Pierce. I'll pay for the cleaning, of course." Alexander almost laughed. The suit cost more than her semester's tuition. "Don't worry about it." He found himself lingering on her face, longer than necessary. "Sophia isn't it?" he asked, reading her name tag. She nodded, bewildered. That night began a secret whirlwind affair. For Alexander, it was a deviation from the script. He was in the final brutal stages of a hostile merger with a rival firm, Cross Industries, run by the notoriously slippery Gideon Cross. His life was a pressure cooker of legal threats, financial maneuvering, and sleepless nights. Sophia was his escape. She knew him only as Alex, a man who worked in finance. She didn't know the sheer scale of his wealth or the trail of corporate bodies in his wake. With her, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a man. They met in quiet jazz clubs, in the village, walked through Central Park after midnight, and talked for hours in her cramped apartment, the smell of turpentine and oil paints clinging to the air. She showed him her art-bold emotional pieces that pulsed with a life he'd never known. He felt a crack appear in the ice around his heart. She saw a vulnerability in him, a loneliness that his sharp suits and confident swagger couldn't hide. She was falling in love with the man in the quiet moments, unaware of the monster that prowled the boardrooms. For Sophia, it was a fairy tale. She'd never met anyone who listened to her so intently, who looked at her art and saw not just a hobby, but a soul laid bare. The intensity of his focus was intoxicating. She was a moth drawn to a flame, blissfully unaware of the inferno that raged just beyond the gentle glow. The merger with Cross Industries was becoming increasingly vicious. Gideon Cross was a snake, and Alexander knew he had to be a mongoose. The pressure was immense. His father's words echoed in his head constantly. Never show weakness. A woman, a child. They are liabilities. Attachments are for the weak. He tried to push the words away when he was with Sophia, but they were a persistent poison. 3 months into their clandestine romance, after a week of particularly brutal negotiations, Alexander showed up at Sophia's door, his tie loosened, a rare exhaustion etched on his face. That night was different. It was less about passion and more about a desperate human need for connection. They held each other until the sun crept over the Brooklyn rooftops, and for a fleeting moment, Alexander allowed himself to imagine a different life. 2 weeks later, Sophia stood in her small bathroom, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test stared back at her, an undeniable verdict. She felt a wave of terror followed by a surge of unexpected, fierce joy. A baby. Their baby. She pictured telling Alex, pictured his surprise melting into a smile. She imagined a life beyond the restaurant, beyond the cramped apartment. A life filled with love and art and a family. She had seen the good man inside him, the one he hid from the world. She was sure this news would be the key to unlocking that man for good. Clutching the test, she made the call that would irrevocably shatter her world and set in motion a reckoning that would take years to unfold. The doorman at the Olympian Alexander's ridiculously opulent apartment building looked through Sophia as if she were a pane of smudged glass. He announced her with a tone of deep suspicion, but Alexander had told him to expect her. Riding the silent high-speed elevator to the penthouse, Sophia's hands trembled, clutching the small gift-wrapped box in her purse. Inside was the positive pregnancy test and a tiny pair of hand-knitted booties she had bought that afternoon. Her hopeful heart beat a cadence against the cold reality of her nerves. The elevator doors opened directly into his apartment. The space was breathtaking and utterly soulless. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city lights glittering like a carpet of diamonds. But inside, everything was chrome glass and shades of grey. There was no art on the walls, no books on the shelves, no sign that a human being actually lived there. It was a monument to wealth, not a home. Alexander was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his back to her. He was back in his armor. The relaxed Alex she knew was gone. This was Mr. Pierce, the titan of industry. "Alex," she said softly. He turned and his face was a mask of cold neutrality. "Sophia, thank you for coming." The formality was a splash of ice water. "Is everything okay? You sounded stressed on the phone. The merger is reaching its final stage," he said, gesturing vaguely to a leather couch she was too intimidated to sit on. "It's a critical time." This was her opening. She could show him that their baby wasn't a complication, but a new, beautiful reason to succeed. She took a deep breath, her carefully rehearsed words suddenly feeling foolish and small in the vast, empty room. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "Something wonderful." She pulled the small box from her purse and held it out to him. He didn't move. He just stared at the box, his eyes narrowing, with a suspicion that made her stomach clench. "What is this?" he asked, his voice flat. "Just, open it." He finally took the box from her. His movements stiff. He unwrapped it with an unnerving precision and lifted the lid. He looked at the test, then at the booties, his expression unreadable for a moment. Sophia held her breath, her hopes soaring. Then the mask on his face didn't just crack. It disintegrated, revealing something monstrous beneath. A sneer of pure, undiluted contempt twisted his lips. He let out a short, brutal laugh that echoed in the silent room. "Wow," he breathed, dropping the booties back into the box, as if they were contaminated. "Wow. I have to hand it to you. The timing is impeccable. Gideon Cross himself couldn't have planned a better move." Sophia recoiled as if struck. What are you talking about? Gideon Cross, I don't understand." "Oh, please," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you. How much is he paying you? Or did you come up with this little scheme, all on your own? The poor, struggling waitress, trapping the billionaire with a baby right before the biggest deal of his life. It's a classic. A pathetic, transparent classic." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, hot and sharp. "Trap Alex, no. This isn't a trap. This is our baby. I love you." The words, "I love you," seemed to enrage him further. He advanced on her, his presence overwhelming. "You don't love me. You love what I can give you. You saw an opportunity, and you took it. My father warned me about women like you my entire life. Leeches. Gold diggers looking for a shortcut." Every word was a physical blow. The man she thought she knew, the one who had held her and whispered secrets in the dark, was gone. This was a stranger, a cruel, paranoid monster. "That's not true," she cried, her voice breaking. "How can you say that? How can you think that of me?" "Because I've seen it 100 times. He roared, his voice bouncing off the cold glass walls. "You are a complication I don't need. A liability I will not accept." He strode over to a sleek, minimalist desk, scribbled something on a check, and ripped it from the book. He strode back and thrust it at her. "Here," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "This is a one-time offer. $10,000. It should be more than enough to fix the problem. Take it, and I never want to see you or hear from you again. Our arrangement is over." Sophia stared at the check, then up at his merciless face. The hope inside her died, replaced by a cold, hard stone of grief and rage. The love she felt curdled into ash. He hadn't just rejected their child, he had rejected her everything. She was everything they had shared. He had painted it all as a sordid transaction. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she took the check from his hand. His eyes flashed with a smug sense of victory. Then she slowly and deliberately tore it into 4 pieces and let them flutter to the floor. "You think my child is a problem?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a fury that burned away her tears. "You think my love can be bought off? You are a pathetic, empty man, Alexander Pierce. You can have your money and your cold, empty life. You are not worth it, and you will never be a father to my child." She turned to leave her dignity, the only thing she had left. "Get her out of here," Alexander snarled into an intercom on the wall. Before she reached the elevator, 2 large men in dark suits appeared, their faces impassive. They flanked her, not touching her, but their presence was a clear, humiliating message. They were escorting the trash out. As the elevator doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was Alexander Pierce standing amidst the torn pieces of the check. His face, a mask of cold, unyielding victory. The ride down was a blur of shame and heartbreak. When she stumbled out onto the street, the vibrant New York night seemed to mock her. She had walked in with a heart full of hope and a beautiful secret. She was leaving with nothing but the crushing weight of his cruelty and the tiny, fierce life growing inside her, a life she would now have to protect and raise all on her own. The abyss had opened up beneath her, and she was falling fast. The weeks that followed were a descent into a grey, featureless hell. The day after her brutal dismissal from Alexander's life, Sophia was called into her manager's office at Aurelia. He couldn't meet her eye. He mumbled something about restructuring and performance issues. She knew weren't real. Her final paycheck was already prepared. She didn't need to ask who was behind it. Alexander's influence was a silent, suffocating poison, and it had just choked the life out of her only source of income. New York, once a city of dreams, became a cage. Every street corner held a memory of him, now tainted and grotesque. The rent on her tiny apartment was a looming monster. Morning sickness made the thought of finding another waitressing job unbearable. She was alone, pregnant and penniless, in one of the most expensive cities in the world. The vibrant canvases in her apartment gathered dust, their colors mocking her bleak reality. She sold what little she had of value, a piece of jewelry from her grandmother, her best camera. It was enough to break her lease and buy a bus ticket. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from him, from the city that held his power. She ended up in Philadelphia, a city chosen at random from the bus station's departure board. It was gritty, less glamorous, but it was anonymous. It was a place to disappear. Her first few months were a blur of survival. She found a tiny third-floor walk-up in a run-down neighborhood. The radiator clanked, the windows rattled, but it was a roof over her head. She took a job at a 24-hour diner called the Liberty Bell, a world away from the starched linens of Aurelia. Here the coffee was burnt, the customers were truckers and night-shift nurses, and the tips were meager. But the owner, a warm, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, named Maria Garcia, saw the desperation and the steel in Sophia's eyes. Maria became her unlikely guardian angel. She never pried into Sophia's past, but she saw the growing swell of her stomach and started leaving extra portions of soup for her at the end of her shifts. "For the little one," she'd say, with a gruff affection. "You need to eat." The pregnancy was difficult. Alone in her small apartment, fear was a constant companion. There were nights she would lie awake, one hand on her belly, terrified of the future of her ability to provide for this child. The ghost of Alexander's words, "fix the problem," haunted her, but then she would feel a tiny flutter, a kick, a hiccup from within, and a fierce, primal wave of love would wash away the fear. This wasn't a problem. This was her child, her purpose, her reason to fight. 9 months after she fled New York, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a crowded city hospital. She named him Noah. Holding him for the first time, all the pain, the betrayal, and the hardship of the past year melted away, replaced by an overwhelming, all-consuming love. He had his father's deep blue eyes, a fact that sent a pang through her heart. But his smile was all his own. He was perfect. He was hers. Life with a newborn was exhausting and relentless. It was a cycle of feeding, changing, and catching a few precious moments of sleep. Her art supplies remained packed away. Her dreams of being a painter seemed like a fantasy from another life. Yet, as Noah grew, something began to shift. Watching him play, seeing the world anew through his curious eyes, reawakened the artist within her. She couldn't afford fancy plastic toys that beeped and flashed, so she began to make them herself. Using scraps of wood from a local lumber yard and non-toxic paints, she carved and painted simple, beautiful toys, a set of stacking rings shaped like river stones, a wooden pull-along duck, a set of blocks painted with letters and animals. They were inspired by her own artistic sensibilities, simple organic forms and a focus on imaginative play. Maria saw the toys scattered around Sophia's apartment during a visit. "Sophia, these are beautiful," she said, picking up a smoothly sanded wooden bird. "You should sell these," Sophia laughed. "Who would buy them?" "Mothers," Maria said simply. "People who are tired of cheap junk from China. Put a few by the register at the diner. See what happens." Hesitantly, Sophia did. She priced them modestly, and to her astonishment they sold. First one, then another. A customer asked if she could make a custom name puzzle. A local blog that focused on handmade goods wrote a small feature on the diner waitress with the magic hands. A tiny spark of hope ignited within her. She created an online shop on Etsy, calling her little venture Petrova Playthings. She took photos of her creations in the soft morning light of her apartment. She wrote descriptions that spoke of her passion for safe, sustainable, and beautiful toys that encouraged creativity. The first few months were slow, a trickle of orders that she would pack on her kitchen table after Noah was asleep. She poured every spare moment and every spare dollar into her work. She taught herself about e-commerce, about marketing on a shoestring budget, about sourcing sustainable wood. The diner job paid the bills, but Petrova Playthings became her lifeline to a future she could build herself. It wasn't just about making toys, it was about reclaiming her identity. She was not Alexander Pierce's discarded secret. She was not a victim. She was a creator, an artist, a mother, and an entrepreneur. Years passed. The Etsy shop grew from a trickle to a steady stream, and then to a flood. She was able to quit her job at the diner, though she and Maria remained close friends. She hired her first employee, a young mother from her neighborhood. She moved into a slightly bigger apartment with a dedicated workshop space. Noah, now a bright and happy 5-year-old, was the chief product tester, his laughter the soundtrack to her work. Sophia had built a life, a real one, from the ashes of the one that had been burned down. It was a quiet life, built on hard work and love, far from the glittering, cruel world of Manhattan. She rarely thought of Alexander Pierce anymore. He was a closed chapter, a ghost from a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. She had everything she needed right here. Or so she thought. By the time Noah was 6, Petrova Playthings was no longer a kitchen table operation. It was a legitimate, thriving business with a dedicated workshop, a small team of employees, and a fiercely loyal customer base. Sophia had become known for her innovative designs, her unwavering commitment to eco-friendly materials, and her authentic brand story. She was featured in national parenting magazines and influential design blogs. She was a success story, the single mother who turned her artistic talent into a beloved brand. But success brought a new set of challenges. Her company was at a tipping point. To grow, she needed a significant capital injection to scale up production, expand her product line, and break into the lucrative high-end retail market. She was a creator, but the world of venture capital and corporate finance was completely alien to her. It was during this time that Daniel Chen entered her life. Daniel was a partner at a boutique venture capital firm in San Francisco that specialized in socially conscious and sustainable businesses. He wasn't like the cutthroat investors she'd nervously read about. He was calm, thoughtful, and genuinely passionate about her products. He had discovered Petrova playthings when buying a gift for his niece and had been impressed not just by the quality of the toy, but by the story and ethos behind the brand. He flew to Philadelphia to meet her. Their first meeting wasn't in a sterile boardroom, but in her bustling, sawdust-scented workshop. He listened more than he talked, asking insightful questions about her design process, her sourcing philosophy, and her vision for the future. He looked at her not as a line on a balance sheet, but as the visionary founder she was. "What you've built here, Sophia, is extraordinary," he told her over coffee after touring the facility. "It's authentic. In a market saturated with mass-produced plastic authenticity is the ultimate currency." Sophia found herself trusting him in a way she hadn't trusted any man in a very long time. Daniel was the antithesis of Alexander Pierce. Where Alexander was a storm of arrogance and power, Daniel was a quiet, steady harbor. His interest in her was professional, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of personal respect and admiration. He saw her strength, her resilience, and her brilliance, and he wasn't intimidated by it. He was drawn to it. His firm invested $2 million in Petrova playthings. The deal was transformative. With the new capital, Sophia was able to upgrade her equipment, hire more staff, and secure partnerships with national boutique chains. Daniel became more than just an investor. He became a mentor and a close confidant. He helped her navigate the complexities of corporate governance, supply chain management, and strategic planning. Their late-night phone calls often drifted from business projections to talk of life dreams and raising children in a complicated world. A gentle, unhurried romance began to blossom between them, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. One afternoon, Daniel called her with a proposal. "The International Toy Fair in New York," he said. "It's the biggest event in the industry. The major players, the department store buyers, the international distributors, they're all there. It's time to introduce Petrova playthings to the world stage. We'll book a premium booth. This is our chance to land a major retail partner." Sophia's heart seized. New York, the name alone, was a cold hand gripping her insides. She hadn't set foot in that city since the day she'd fled. "I don't know, Daniel." She hesitated. "It's a huge expense. Are we ready?" "We are more than ready," he insisted, gently sensing her reluctance, but not knowing its source. "Your new luxury line of heirloom toys is perfect for this market. This is the next step, Sophia. You've earned this." She knew he was right. From a business standpoint, it was a no-brainer. But emotionally, it felt like preparing to walk back into the lion's den. She had spent 6 years building a fortress around herself and her son, a life where the name Alexander Pierce had no power. To go back meant risking a confrontation with a ghost she had long since tried to exorcise. But the Sophia of today was not the terrified girl of 6 years ago. She was a CIO, a mother, a survivor. She had faced down financial ruin and crushing loneliness. She could face a city. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, surprising herself. "Let's do it. Let's show them what we've built." The weeks leading up to the toy fair were a whirlwind of activity. Prototypes were finalized, marketing materials were printed, and a stunning booth was designed. Sophia poured all her anxiety into her work, ensuring every detail was perfect. Noah was excited, chattering about seeing the big buildings and staying in a hotel. For his sake, she pushed her own dread deep down. The biggest opportunity of the fair came not from a buyer, but from an acquisition scout. A representative from Pierce Global's new lifestyle and family brands division reached out expressing significant interest in Petrova playthings. They had been tracking the company's meteoric rise and saw it as a perfect fit for their portfolio. They requested a private meeting with the founder and her team during the fair to discuss a potential strategic partnership, or perhaps something more. Daniel was ecstatic. "Sophia, this is massive. Pierce Global is one of the biggest players on the planet. If they acquire us, you'd be set for life. They have the distribution network to put your toys in every corner of the globe." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. Pierce Global. It couldn't be. It was a common name, wasn't it? She frantically searched for the company's CEO. The face that stared back from the screen was older, sharper, colder, but it was unmistakably him. Alexander Pierce. Her first instinct was to cancel to run. But then a different feeling took root, a cold, hard anger. He wanted to buy her company, the company she had built from nothing, the company born from the ashes of the life he had destroyed, the company named for the son he had tried to erase. The irony was so bitter, so profound, it was almost laughable. He didn't know. He had no idea who was behind Petrova Playthings. He just saw a successful business, another asset to be acquired, another notch on his belt. She looked at Daniel, her expression hardening into a mask of pure resolve. "Set up the meeting," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'll be there." Daniel, mistaking her intensity for ambition, grinned. "That's the spirit. We're going to walk into that boardroom and knock them dead." Sophia nodded slowly. Oh, she thought. Someone is certainly going to be knocked dead. After 6 years, the conductor of New York was about to face the music, and this time, she was the one holding the baton. The Pierce Global headquarters was exactly as Sophia had imagined it, a monument of intimidating, soul-crushing grandeur. It pierced the Manhattan skyline, a shard of dark glass and steel that seemed to suck the warmth from the sun. Walking through the cavernous marble lobby, flanked by Daniel and her small legal team, Sophia felt a tremor of her old fear. This was his world, his kingdom built on the kind of power that could swat a person like a fly. She steeled herself, drawing strength from the memory of 6 years of struggle and triumph. She was not the same woman who had been escorted out of his penthouse by security guards. She wore a tailored power suit the color of deep ocean blue. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional cut, and her eyes held the steady, unwavering gaze of a CEO who knew her own worth. They were led to the 50th floor boardroom. The panoramic view was the same one she remembered from his apartment, a god's-eye perspective of the city. A long, polished obsidian table reflected the grim faces of Alexander's executive team. At the head of the table, his back to the door as he spoke to his lawyer, was him, Alexander Pierce. He looked harder than she remembered. The youthful arrogance had calcified into a severe, unyielding authority. There were threads of silver at his temples and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He commanded the room with a silent, predatory stillness. Mr. Pierce, his lawyer, a man Sophia vaguely recognized as Ben Carter, said, "The team from Petrova Playthings is here." Alexander ended his conversation and turned. For a single fleeting second, his face was a blank mask of professional courtesy. He extended a hand, his eyes not yet fully registering who he was looking at. "Thank you for coming. I'm Alexander Pierce. We've been very impressed with—" His voice trailed off, his eyes locked with hers. The mask of the CEO dissolved. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock that seemed to physically rock him. His hand, still extended, froze in mid-air. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath his tan. His breath hitched an audible crack in the room's oppressive silence. It was her, the waitress, the woman he had brutally discarded, the memory which he had buried under 6 years of relentless work and meaningless conquests erupted in his mind with the force of a grenade. He saw her tear-streaked face in his penthouse, heard her voice, trembling with rage, as she called him an empty man. The room filled with high-powered executives and lawyers fell utterly silent. Everyone could feel the sudden, inexplicable shift in energy, the air crackling with an invisible high-voltage current. Daniel Chen, sensing a history he couldn't comprehend, stepped slightly forward, a protective gesture towards Sophia. Sophia held Alexander's gaze, her expression unreadable. She did not offer her hand. She did not smile. She simply stood there, a ghost from his past, now made of flesh, bone, and undeniable success. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice cool and steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. It was the first time she had spoken his name in 6 years. The sound of it on her lips seemed to jolt him again. Ben Carter, a seasoned lawyer, used to diffusing tense situations, quickly tried to regain control. "Well, please have a seat. We're all very excited to discuss the potential synergies between our companies." No one moved. Alexander couldn't tear his eyes away from her. His mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible. Petrova Playthings. Petrova. How had he not made the connection? The name was common, but still. The raw data reports and financial summaries had told him about a brilliant, elusive founder who had built a brand from scratch. They had never mentioned her. He finally retracted his hand, clenching it into a fist at his side. He gestured woodenly towards the chairs. "Please, sit." Sophia took her seat directly across from him, the vast expanse of polished stone between them feeling like a battlefield. Her team arranged themselves beside her. Daniel opened his laptop to begin their presentation. "As you know," Daniel began, his voice smooth and professional, "Petrova Playthings has seen a 400% growth in the last 2 years. Our success is built on 3 core pillars: innovative design, uncompromising sustainability, and an authentic brand story." The screen behind him lit up. The first slide was a beautifully shot photo of their workshop filled with light and happy employees. The second slide showcased their award-winning designs. Alexander stared blankly, his mind still short-circuiting. Then Daniel clicked to the third slide. "And at the heart of our brand story is the inspiration behind it all." The image that filled the screen was a candid shot of a laughing, vibrant little boy, his head thrown back in pure joy as he played with a set of their wooden animal blocks. He was about 6 years old. He had Sophia's warm smile, but his eyes, they were a piercing, unmistakable shade of deep blue. They were Alexander's eyes. It was like looking at a photograph of himself as a child. A low, involuntary sound escaped Alexander's throat. His meticulously controlled world, which had started cracking the moment she walked in, now simply ceased to exist. It imploded into a silent, screaming black hole. A son. He had a son. The boy on the screen was his son, was the son he had tried to pay someone to fix, the son whose existence he had denied and erased. The presentation continued, but Alexander heard none of it. The buzz of Daniel Chen's voice, the clicking of the keyboard, the rustling of papers, it was all just white noise. His entire being was focused on the image of that boy. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic prisoner. Guilt so old and deep, he'd thought it long dead, rose up like bile in his throat. It was a feeling more terrifying than losing any deal, more profound than any failure he had ever known. He looked from the screen back to Sophia. Her face was calm, but her eyes, when they met his, were filled with 6 years of cold, hard, righteous fury. She had done this deliberately. This meeting, this presentation, this reveal, it was a perfectly executed act of retribution. She hadn't come here to sell her company. She had come to collect a debt he never knew he owed. He, Alexander Pierce, the master of the universe. The man who was never surprised, who was always 10 steps ahead, was utterly and completely speechless. The presentation ended. Daniel Chen concluded with a confident summary of their projected earnings, completely oblivious to the personal cataclysm that had just unfolded. Questions were invited. The room remained tomb-silent. Alexander's executive team glanced nervously at their boss, who was ashen-faced and rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. Finally, Ben Carter cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "Thank you, Mr. Chen, Ms. Petrova. A very compelling presentation. We'll need some time to review this internally. We will be in touch." It was a clumsy but effective dismissal. Sophia stood her composure absolute. She nodded crisply. "We look forward to hearing from you." She and her team gathered their things and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a stunned and shattered Alexander Pierce in their wake. The moment the door clicked shut, Alexander shoved his chair back so violently it crashed into the credenza behind him. "Everyone out," he bellowed, his voice raw. Now his team scrambled to obey, leaving him alone with Ben. "Alex, what the hell was that?" Ben asked, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Alexander rasped, pacing the room like a caged animal. "That woman, Sophia Petrova. I knew her years ago." Ben's eyes widened as the pieces began to click into place. He'd been Alexander's lawyer and closest friend for over a decade. He remembered the period 6 years ago, the brutal merger with Cross Industries, Alexander's uncharacteristic distraction, and then the sudden icy return to form. He'd never known the details, and the boy Ben asked quietly. The boy in the photos, Alexander stopped pacing and stared out the window, his reflection a pale, haunted mask. "He has my eyes." "Ben." The admission was barely a whisper. "He has my goddamn eyes." For the rest of the day, Alexander was a ghost in his own company. He cancelled all his meetings. He sat in his office, the door closed, replaying the moment she walked in, the moment he saw his son's face, over and over. The fortress of ice he had built around his heart had been dynamited. He was exposed raw and drowning in a sea of regret so vast it threatened to consume him. His first impulse was to use his power, buy the company, force her to deal with him. But he knew with a sickening certainty that she was immune to his money. She had proven that 6 years ago when she'd torn up his check. This required something else, something he was woefully unequipped for humanity. He spent hours trying to get her on the phone. Her assistant professionally stonewalled him every time. "Ms. Petrova is in meetings. All communications regarding the potential acquisition should be directed to our legal counsel." This detached corporate response was more infuriating than any screaming match. She was using the rules of his own world against him. Finally, driven by a desperation he hadn't felt since he was a child, he did something he never did. He went to her. He found out which hotel she was staying at and waited in the lobby, a lurking, multi-billion-dollar shadow. When she walked in with Daniel Chen, laughing at something he'd said, a possessive, irrational rage surged through Alexander. He stepped in front of them, blocking their path. "Sophia." "We need to talk." Sophia's smile vanished. Daniel immediately stepped between them. "Excuse me, Mr. Pierce. This is highly inappropriate. This has nothing to do with you." Alexander snarled at him, his eyes fixed on Sophia. "This is between us." "There is no us," Sophia said, her voice like chips of ice. "If you have something to say, say it to my lawyer. I'm not talking about the company," he exploded, his voice drawing stares from across the lobby. "I'm talking about my son." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Sophia flinched as if he'd slapped her. "He is my son." She corrected him, her voice low and fierce. "You forfeited any right to call him yours when you called him a problem and tried to pay me to get rid of him. You don't get to show up 6 years later and claim a title you threw in the garbage." She tried to push past him, but he grabbed her arm. "I need to see him." "Let go of her," Daniel said, his voice dangerously calm. Before it could escalate further, Sophia wrenched her arm free. "You will never lay a hand on me again," she seethed, "and you will stay away from my son. You had your chance to be a father, and you spat on it. Live with that." She turned and walked towards the elevators. Daniel close behind her, leaving Alexander standing alone in the middle of the lobby, shaking with a toxic cocktail of rage, shame, and despair. He retreated to his office, defeated. Ben was waiting for him with a bottle of scotch. "It didn't go well, I take it," Ben said, dryly pouring 2 glasses. Alexander collapsed into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "She hates me, and she's right too. God, Ben, what did I do?" He recounted the entire story. The merger, the pressure, the paranoia, and the brutal, unforgivable words he'd said to her in his penthouse. As he spoke, something in Ben's memory stirred. "Wait a minute, Alex. You said this was during the final push of the Gideon Cross merger. What does that matter?" "You said you accused her of being a spy for him." Ben pressed his lawyer's mind, kicking into gear. "Where did you get that idea? That was a very specific paranoia." Alexander paused. "I don't know. The pressure was insane. Gideon was playing dirty, leaking rumors, trying to spook my investors. My father was in my ear about, I don't know, Ben. Someone put a bug in my ear. I received an anonymous tipper file. It contained photos of her talking to one of Cross's junior analysts outside a coffee shop. It looked suspicious. It fed right into my worst fears." Ben's face went pale. He stood up and went to his own office, returning minutes later with a dusty file box labeled Cross Merger 2019. He sifted through old documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I remember something," he muttered. "During the discovery phase after the merger, we found evidence that Cross had hired private investigators to tail you to dig up dirt. We dismissed most of it as standard corporate espionage. But that analyst she was talking to, I remember his name. He was fired from Cross Industries 2 weeks after the merger for the embezzlement. But what if that was a cover story? Ben started typing furiously on his computer, cross-referencing old files and running new searches. An hour passed in silence, punctuated only by the clicking of keys and the clinking of ice in Alexander's glass. Finally, Ben stopped. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What is it?" Alexander demanded. "The analyst. He wasn't fired. He was given a massive severance and signed a rock-solid NDA. He now lives in the Cayman Islands. And that anonymous tip you received. I've been digging into the metadata from our old server backups. The file was routed through a series of ghost servers, but the origin point, the digital fingerprint, it traces back to a shell corporation owned by Gideon Cross." Alexander felt the floor drop out from under him. "What are you saying? It was a setup?" "Alex," Ben said, his voice grim. "Gideon found out you were seeing someone. He knew your psychological weak spot was your father's paranoia about being betrayed, so he manufactured a betrayal. He had his analyst accidentally bump into Sophia, engage her in a conversation, and had a PI photograph it out of context. He fabricated a perfect narrative and fed it to you knowing you'd be too proud and paranoid to question it. He didn't just want to beat you in business, he wanted to break you personally. He used her and your unborn child as a weapon to ensure you were distracted and ruthless enough to push the deal through on his terms. The revelation didn't absolve Alexander. His words, his actions, they were still his own. He was the one who had turned his back on his own child. But the knowledge that his cruelty had been so expertly orchestrated, that he had been a puppet in his rival's sick game, added a horrifying new dimension to his guilt. He hadn't just been a monster, he had been a fool, and his foolishness had cost him 6 years with his son. The knowledge of Gideon Cross's manipulation settled in Alexander's gut like a block of ice. It explained the source of his paranoia, but did nothing to excuse the depths of his cruelty. For a day, he was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his failure, both as a man and as a strategist. He had prided himself on seeing every angle on never being played, yet Gideon had played him like a fiddle, using his deepest-seated insecurities as the sheet music. The paralysis gave way to a cold, focused rage unlike anything he had ever felt before. This was not about a business deal anymore. This was about his son. He arranged a meeting with Gideon Cross under the guise of discussing a new joint venture. Gideon, arrogant and ever confident in his victory from 6 years prior, agreed, meeting him at a private club, known for its discretion. They sat in plush leather chairs, a fireplace crackling nearby. Gideon was smug, expansive, ordering a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. "To new beginnings," Alex Gideon said, raising his glass. Alexander didn't touch his. He leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I know what you did, Gideon." Gideon's smile faltered. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "The file. The analyst." Sophia Petrova Alexander said, letting each name land like a hammer blow. "You found out about her. You knew she was pregnant. And you used her. You fed my paranoia to make me push her away, to make me a monster, so I'd be distracted and focused solely on crushing you at the negotiating table. You used my unborn child as a pawn in a business deal." The color drained from Gideon's face. For the first time since Alexander had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "That's a ridiculous accusation," he stammered. "Is it?" Alexander slid a folder across the table. It contained printouts of the server data. Ben had found bank statements showing the analyst's severance and a newly signed notarized affidavit from another former Cross-employee who had been aware of the scheme, whom Ben's investigators had tracked down and flipped in the last 24 hours. "I can destroy you with this," Gideon Alexander said, his voice devoid of heat, which made it all the more terrifying. "I can leak this to the press, to the SEC. Your career, your reputation will be incinerated. But that's too easy. Instead, you are going to sell me back the telecom subsidiary I sold you in the 2019 merger. You will sell it back for $1. And then you will disappear. If I ever see your face in this industry again, I will release this file to the world." Gideon stared at the folder, then at Alexander's implacable face. He was trapped. He nodded slowly, his reign of manipulative gamesmanship over. Destroying Gideon, however, brought no satisfaction. It was a hollow, necessary act of vengeance that did nothing to fix the real damage. Alexander knew that winning back even a sliver of Sophia's respect, let alone a place in his son's life, couldn't be achieved through power or money. It required a language he was only just beginning to learn: atonement. His first act was to formally and publicly withdraw Pierce Global's interest in acquiring Petrova Playthings. He released a statement praising the company as a leader in its field, an independent force that he deeply admired. The move sent shockwaves through the industry, and immediately boosted Sophia's brand prestige. Then through Ben, he learned of a persistent problem. Sophia was facing a patent troll, a shell company that was harassing her with frivolous lawsuits over her toy designs, draining her resources and energy. It was a common tactic used to bleed smaller companies dry. Alexander used his own formidable legal team, operating through a third-party firm, so his name was never attached to go after the patent troll with overwhelming force. He buried them in counterclaims and exposed their fraudulent practices. Within a week, the troll dropped all claims against Petrova Playthings and dissolved. Sophia would never know who her anonymous benefactor was. It was an act of protection, not possession. He sent her a simple handwritten letter through his lawyer. It contained no excuses or justifications. Sophia, I know there are no words that can undo the damage I caused. My actions 6 years ago were monstrous and unforgivable. I was cruel, blind, and I have lived with the ghost of my failure every day since I saw you again. I know that I deserve nothing from you or from your son. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness, as I have not earned it. I am writing only to say that I am sorry. Profoundly, and for the rest of my life, I will be sorry. I will not try to acquire your company or interfere in your life again. The only thing I ask, if you can ever find it in your heart to grant it, is the chance, at a time and place entirely of your choosing, to perhaps one day meet my son. Not as his father, a title I have no right to, but simply as a man who shares his eyes. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. Alexander Weeks passed with no response. Alexander fell into a quiet, tormented routine. He ran his company, but the fire was gone. His ambition had been replaced by a hollow ache. He had conquered the world, but had lost his soul. Then one day, an email arrived from Sophia. It was brief and to the point. Mr. Pierce Noah is beginning to ask questions. He deserves to know his story. Not your version or my version, but the truth. Be at the North Woods section of Central Park on Saturday at 10 a.m. Come alone. This is not for you. This is for him. On Saturday, Alexander arrived early, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. He wore simple trousers and a sweater, having left the power suit in his closet. He saw them near the carousel. Sophia was holding Noah's hand. The boy was even more vibrant and full of life than in his photos. Sophia watched him approach, her expression guarded. She knelt and spoke quietly to Noah, who then looked over at Alexander with wide, curious eyes. His eyes. Sophia stood and walked towards him, stopping a few feet away. He knows that you helped give him life, she said softly. He knows that you were not ready to be a father then. The rest of the story is for him to learn over time. Today, you are just a man named Alex. She led him over to Noah. Noah, this is Alex. Alexander knelt so he was at eye level with the small boy. All the words he had rehearsed, all the speeches and apologies vanished. He just looked at his son, this miracle he had so casually thrown away, and his eyes filled with tears. "Hello, Noah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's very nice to meet you. Your mum has told me you love to build things." Noah nodded shyly, clutching a small wooden dinosaur, one of his mother's designs. "I made a big tower yesterday. I'd love to see it sometime," Alexander said gently. They didn't stay long. They walked by the pond, and Noah pointed out the ducks. Alexander listened, asking quiet questions, never pushing, never demanding. He was just present. He saw Sophia watching him. Her arms crossed her face, a canvas of conflicting emotions. He could see Daniel was not with her today. When it was time for them to go, Alexander stood. "Thank you, Sophia. he said, his voice full of gratitude she could not mistake. "Thank you for this." She simply nodded. "This was a first step, Alex. Nothing more. What happens next depends entirely on you." As he watched them walk away, Noah turning once to give him a small, hesitant wave, Alexander knew his life's work was no longer about acquiring companies. It was about the slow, painful, and patient process of earning the right to be in that little boy's life. His return to New York had left him speechless, but it was the quiet possibility of a future where he could be a father, that truly took his breath away. The path forward was long and uncertain, but for the first time in his empty, gilded life, Alexander Pierce had something real to build. And so our story comes to a close, not with a perfect fairy tale ending, but with a fragile, hopeful beginning. We've journeyed with Sophia from a place of crushing betrayal and despair to one of incredible strength and self-made success. We've watched Alexander Pierce, a man imprisoned in a tower of his own wealth and paranoia, be brought to his knees by the truth of his past. His journey of atonement is just starting. It won't be easy, and the scars he inflicted may never fully fade. The story leaves us with a powerful question. Can a man who committed such a heartless act truly redeem himself? And what does redemption even look like? It's more than grand gestures. It's found in the quiet moments, in keeping promises, in showing up, and in slowly, painstakingly rebuilding trust, one brick at a time. What do you think? Does Alexander deserve a second chance to be a father to Noah? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, regret, and the powerful bond between a mother and child moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a powerful drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Thank you for listening.